We've been in the process over the last couple of months of starting to dismantle a museum. It's a lot of fun and a lot of excitement, a lot of work when you put one together, and then it's a little poignant and not so much fun and a little sad when you take one apart.
How long is this going to take you to take it apart? I mean, and you got to move it over to Route 3.
Yeah, it'll take us if we work at it, full time, 8 hours a day, it'll take us another 2 days to kind of get it where it needs to be, or where you don't worry about leaving anything behind. I'll put it that way. But museums when you plan a museum, you always plan museums around storylines. You have a story to tell. In this case, we have a historical story to tell. And so what we try to do here, this museum, of course, was put in late 2012, early 2013, and it was never intended to be permanent. And of course, we soon found that we had a lot more to talk about and more objects than we had room, for exhibit purposes. But we put it together, we laid it out, and what you try to do is you try to follow a storyline, and then the objects support the storyline. In most instances, there's very few iconic objects that can stand alone without some type of interpretation. Now, you may have George Washington's sword, okay, and yes, that's really nice. That's George Washington's sword. But even George Washington's sword has a story. And so what you try to do, you always try to pick the objects to go with the story. Not only that, but you look, when you're looking at a building, you're looking at lighting. How are you going to utilize the lighting in a building so that you can showcase what you have? But also, you also have to, and this is a humidity measuring device. So you know that, your HVAC systems and everything will work. And, most museums, 55% humidity is what the standard is. And we've been able to maintain that here. And we're going to be able to do that at the new facility as well. The other thing are the cases themselves. When you go to put objects out, first off, there's the object, and this is a case. Now we've gone ahead. We use those large suction devices to move the plexiglass. Now the plexiglass is ultraviolet, so it protects it against any type of infrared rays, anything like that. And you'll notice that we blocked the lower windows because when we first came in here, we had sunlight coming directly in. And even though we had the plexiglass, we wanted to provide added measure protection, doing the same thing at the other building. The other thing, of course, is the objects themselves. You put them out, where people can see them. You put a descriptive label to go with each one of them. And, a lot of times you'll have a story like this. This case talked about our courthouse. And we know Mr. Dabney, who was clerk of court, talked about after the war that there was a hole big enough to ride a horse through on the side facing Fredericksburg. And that part of the courthouse was heavily shelled, far more so than people realize. In fact, in 2016, I was on my way to do a program at the courthouse, and they were out churning up the flower bed. And I picked up a shell fragment out of the flower bed.
Really?
Yeah, and I have an eye for stuff like that. And of course, I work with it all the time. And this, of course, would be a shell fragment. The other one was out of a shingle type shell. But anyway, it was still laying there all these years later.
All these years, that's amazing.
Waiting for somebody with really good eyesight for things like that to find. And so the material's still here. And the courthouse area was heavily shelled. And these are part of the guys that did it. Battery L is the 1st New York Light Artillery. And this photograph was taken in the years after the war. Veterans, which is why we have the national parks today.
Yeah.
And I looked at that photograph and go, man, they'd still do it.
Yeah.
At the time that photograph was taken. So what we tried to do here was to tell the story of that. And then we used, artillery rounds and everything else to supplement that story. And this is probably one of the rarest ones you'll ever see from Spotsylvania. That is actually a 24-pound spherical case projectile. And Spotsylvania was the first major engagement where they used the 24-pound siege mortars.
Huh.
And so this was actually recovered locally, and you know, and the only one I know of that's ever come from Spotsylvania. And they used those basically to fire into the area of the Bloody Angle during that. Of course, we tell the story about the Bloody Angle here, and we've done a lot of shifting around as we've taken some things out. And then, of course, you know, we had the material that actually came from the Bloody Angle. A lot of this came from the Aldrich family, who owned the land that you're on today for many, many years. And early, when I was going through that collection, I was fascinated by the musket barrels. And the reason why is, you'll notice this one appears to be exploded on the end of it, and this one's badly bent. And according to the notes from the family, both of these came from the Bloody Angle years before the National Park Service took control of it. And so I thought it'd be neat to go down and have them, you know, an MRI done on them. And so we took them down to the local hospital. They were very nice down at Spotsylvania General Regional Medical Center. And they actually did the MRIs, and what we discovered was that both of them were still loaded. And so this was actually had to be struck, you know, probably before the gentleman had the opportunity to fire it. And so this one has 1 round in it, and this one has 2 rounds in it. In fact, we know this to be a Confederate musket because you can see the Gardner bullets in the close-up that was dropped, you know, in the Bloody Angle. And of course, you know, over the years, the Bloody Angle, you know, gave up some of its secrets. You know, the little things like a gold wedding band, you know, a trivet. A lot of people don't realize they were in the trench lines here for an extended period of time. And so they were cooking in the trench lines, and they were tying their shelter halves back over to protect them from the sun and the rain. And so, you know, those are the type of stories that we try to tell. But the years, and even today, everybody had a cabinet. And, you know, they would pick the stuff up and they would take it home, and they're still in a cabinet or on a shelf. In fact, I always call this the buzzard box. This was recovered from the attic of the Dabney Aldrich house here at Spotsylvania. The attic was locked up in 1944 and never opened back up by the family because I think they were a little bit superstitious.
Yeah.
And so when we had the opportunity and the owner said, you know, you can go up there, you can, you know, take, you know, whatever you find. And boy, did we find some stuff. We found several artillery rounds, you know, rolling around on the attic floor. But we also found this. And
what a find.
Yeah. And what happened, once again, they would go out, they would pick stuff up off the farm, they would bring it back and toss it in. And I tell the story that there was a large buzzard living up there. And I actually had to shoot him with a fire extinguisher to get him out. He didn't want to go. And but I've never touched the box. The box is always as it was found. And one of the things, you know, there's some string in here, and there's dirt. I mean, that's just a fact of life. But the thing that always amazed me was that object right there. And so I'm going to check to see if you're an SAIS. Do you know what an SAIS is?
I do not.
Super Artifact Identification Specialist. Okay? And so I'm going to let you take a guess at what that is. Now, it's in amongst iron pieces or canister. The lead balls, of course, are bullets, all the different types. Pieces of shell fragments from shells that exploded. But in the midst of it, there was that round blue cylindrical object. So you got any idea what it is?
Is it just a little ball that a little kid would play with?
A little ball a kid would play with?
Yeah.
You're close.
That's my final answer.
Is that your final? That is actually a blue clay marble.
A marble.
Right. And the soldiers, of course, carried marbles. And usually that's what I would call, growing up, Alabama blue clay. Because you only see that particular large, you know, they were carried in some instances by Alabama troops in their pockets. Perhaps it was a good luck charm. Perhaps he had a pocket full of them. Or perhaps that was his thumb round, you know, the one that he always used. So it's hard to say. And then, of course, we got a wood cane that was cut in the battlefield and things like that. And now, you know, the ultraviolet cases, you know, we've taken them apart. We'll remove these objects over the next couple of days, and then some of them will go back on exhibit, some will not, because we're trying to change things.
Yeah,
up a
yeah.
little bit. So if you ever wanted to see, and I'll do this just for you, and this is actually one of my favorite objects. This was given to us by a family. That is the 7-day memo pad that belonged to Captain John Ponce. Now memo pads, they made thousands of them, and it's basically what it is. It's a little 7-day memo pad.
Okay.
And they would take a pencil and they would write things down on it. And he was carrying this at Spotsylvania Courthouse at the time the battle opened up on May 8th. He was up at the intersection of Brock Road and Blockhouse Road. The battery was right in the corner of that intersection right there on this side. And they were actually hit both front and rear. And he was mortally wounded. And you can see the blood stains on it still. Okay, and the last thing he wrote on it was, "Dear Mother, I am come home to die," but he never made it. And he was out of Washington County, North Carolina. And so, you know, just one of those objects. And of course, this is a Whitworth projectile of the type that struck and killed General John Sedgwick. We talked about this in the panel around the corner. But basically, exhibit cases are funny. They're specially constructed. They're expensive. They're designed to support the weight of your objects. And in this particular case, this one has the seal from 1831 in Spotsylvania County. It's kind of interesting because Spotsylvania was visited in 1862 by federal cavalry, and it was the first, I guess, ransacking. They came into the courthouse. Of course, Mr. Dabney heard they were coming and removed the records and buried them in a box to keep it from hiding.
Yeah.
And when they asked him where all the records were, he said they were gone. They were all gone. He never said where they went. So he really, you know, very religious and devout man. He didn't tell a lie. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that they're very proud, they took the seal of Spotsylvania County, but what they didn't realize was that seal was already obsolete. The seal was actually changed in 1851. So they got an obsolete seal, which is a wonderful piece, but that's what was used, of course, to stamp official papers. And so it's sort of, this is the way it goes. You start, and there's a special set of security screws in here. It's designed to keep the cabinet intact.
Yeah.
Like that. And I'm sorry, there's so many of them. I guess if you time lapse this, it'll go a lot quicker. So, but it's actually easier to take them apart than it is to put them together. Because you've got to remount it and everything else.
And I guess that, for the next month, that's what you'll be doing out at
Yeah, and for the next month, we'll be putting objects. We've got what I call the informational panels, like this one. They're all in. And so, you know, basically it comes apart, and I'm going to step down now. And then we're going to very carefully lift. You can see how well it fits. And this is what happens when you get a really good exhibit company. And, you know, having worked for the Army all those years, exhibits, you understand real quick who are good ones and who are bad ones. And so now everything's exposed. And the next thing we would do, of course, is I'll walk over here and give me just a second. I'm going to disappear for a second. And I'm going to come back with a box and acid-free paper. And I'm going to take this out, and I'm going to very carefully roll it as it comes out. Just like that. And that pads and protects the object. There's no acid, so there's no transfer. Come up and come down. And there we go. It's ready to be packed and moved.
And just this will be repeated over and over again.
Over and over again. And these are nice. Those are heavy.
You're moving. I know you're excited where you're moving. We were just there, and it's you're going to have. more visibility, but I'm sure there's there's a little bit of sadness just because you've spent a lot of time here.
Well, there is, and I think part of it is, for me, for this one, like I said, I think I told you earlier, we were able to do a dive down here. We were able to, because of the space that we had, and of course we expanded out into the hallway, we were able to get into more than just the battle. We were able to talk about the stories, about the people, especially the Spotsylvania County, residents. And we're not going to be able to do that over there. When we step back and look at it, we realize that, as I said, it's impossible to tell 3 years of the effect on the civilian population, in the space.
But you've done a pretty good job.
Well, we tried, and we tried to tell the story here. Once again, I've always advocated for larger space, and will continue to do so. But perhaps someday we'll be able to even tell more about what we have. One of the things when I started here, I don't really feel like we had a history, and over the years, I call it data mining. Whenever I can find a reference, an instance, anything like that, and it gets copied and put into a computer system here dedicated to the history, and we've got about 1.6 million trigs of information now in that system. So it then becomes the problem, wow, that's a neat story, and that's a neat story, and that's a neat story. And now, which story do I really want to tell? Well, I'll tell this one. No, so you have trouble making up your mind.
Well, I can't
it's
wait.
Great to have options.
I can't wait to see the next time when we're back on Route 3 and how everything looks put together.
Right, and we're looking forward to it too. The one great thing is our collections are also out there at that space, and so we'll be able, to help people, who have questions a lot quicker than send me an email kind of thing. So we look forward to that.